Hi folks, welcome back. I'm Heather, and this is Recently Seen Reading. This is my weekly wrap-up in the quiet before the storm that is Thanksgiving supper. I've made good headway this week, reading with the usual mix of fiction and non-fiction, light reading and serious reading. I'm in general happy with what I've managed to get through this week. I've made steady progress on my second Victober selection, which is The Canadian Crusoes by Catherine Parr Traill. This is, as I expected it to be, burdened by a lot of religiosity, a lot of landscape description, and a startling amount of stereotypical racist descriptions of Mohawk and Ojibwe peoples. So not too many surprises there. Maybe the only surprise is that the novel has recently been reprinted. That's an interesting thing to have happened. Not sure what's behind that. I'm going to poke around and see if I can figure that out. I've also finished a bit of local history by Andrew Theobald. Let's see, Dangerous Enemies, Sympathizers, which is about the internment camp in New Brunswick, just outside of Fredericton, the place then and now surrounded by trees. And it's a pretty good local history. It's well written, it's for a general audience. It does a good job of explaining the sequence of events at Ripple with the initial internment of Jewish refugees shipped over from England in 1940 and then gradually and slowly released into the Canadian population around 1942. The freeing of the refugees was massively delayed by the anti-Semitism of the Canadian government and people. So that's a shameful thing, and if you're interested in that part of Canadian history, there's an excellent book by Irving Abella that talks about this. I believe it's called None is Too Many. Theobald also covers the second phase of internment at the Ripple internment camp, and those were German POWs, largely merchant marines, Italian Canadians, and Canadian fascists. And on a whole, it's an easy to read history for a general audience. Its primary limitation from my point of view is that while it has an excellent bibliography, it doesn't have footnotes. So if you were interested in tracing a particular thread further, it's not going to help you very much. But as a general history for an average reader curious about that part of either New Brunswick history or Canadian history, it's a useful book to have read. In terms of fiction, I read two novels, both of which were good. I think I finished up Cherie Demeline's Empire of Wild and Lynn Cody's Watching You Without Me. Both of these were released this fall. So Empire of Wild is Demeline's novel for adults, and it's focused on the idea of a rogaru, a werewolf-like creature, the Métis version of that mythology or cosmology. And it tells the story of Joan, who's grieving the recent death and disappearance of her husband, Victor. She goes off in pursuit of him and discovers a man who may or may not be Victor in a tent revival missionary camp that's moving across northern Ontario. But I think this novel is well done. It's got really great portraits of family life, the way teasing and humor are used to bind families together and at the same time express dissent from things within a family structure. If it's got a weakness, I think it's not in its portrayal of Métis characters and Métis families, or portrayal of the Rogaru story and what it means in the past and now. But there's some trouble, I think, with some of the portraits of the missionary characters, essentially. The white Christian born-again characters who are essentially the antagonists throughout the story. They're a little bit shallow and stereotypical, but other than that, it's a fine novel. And I would recommend it if you're curious about Demeline's writing for adults, and if you're curious about the way Christian cosmologies and Métis cosmologies interact or don't interact. If you've read Eden Robinson's Trickster novels, which are more of a YA slant, you might be interested in Demeline's novel. The other one I finished was Lynn Cody's Watching You Without Me, which was released a couple weeks ago. It's a story of Karen who returns home to Nova Scotia to look after her sister Kelly after her mother Irene's death. So it's a novel about caregiving, what it means to be a caregiver, what it means to refuse to be a caregiver, and not so much about what it means to be in need of care. It's all told from Karen's point of view and from some undefined point in the future where Karen is kind of ancient mariner-like retelling the story of this one season in her life and in Kelly's life. So Karen is 40-something and her sister Kelly is 50-something, and Kelly is intellectually disabled and probably functions at the level of a 4 or 5-year-old. It talks largely about Karen in relationship with her mother and the role a caregiver named Trevor played in Irene, the mother's life, and is trying to play in Karen and Kelly's life. It's a supremely creepy novel. It's a great thriller in that sense. Throughout the whole thing, you can see Karen making inexplicably bad decision after bad decision. And I found this both very effective and very unsettling, partly because my reaction is embedded in my familiarity with some of the long-term care facilities that Cody has based parts of the novel on. So one of the things that Karen, the protagonist, has to grapple with is whether she will carry out her mother's plan to move Kelly into a long-term care facility. So it's an excellent novel, I think. It's a masterful command of point of view and pacing. It's a very good kind of novel about domestic lives of human beings, and a very good suspenseful novel, if a little unsettling if you've had to deal with caregiving issues yourself. The last thing I read that I want to talk about this week is Nikki French's most recent novel. It's called The Lying Room, which also came out very recently. And it suffers in comparison to Cody's novel. The French novel has all of the usual kind of components that were involved in, say, the Frida Klein series, which I did enjoy. So instead of a character who wanders around London in the throes of insomnia, walking the hidden rivers of London, which is what Frida Klein does, instead we have a character named Nave who frantically is bicycling around London, some of the similar kinds of pathways, but she makes her way to and fro from work to home to other locations. So in the first 20 or 30 pages of the novel, we learn that Nave has been having an affair with her boss, that she's arrived at the apartment where they have conducted their affair and discover him dead on the floor. And her immediate reaction is to clean up the entire scene, to remove all evidence that she's ever been there. Shockingly bad decision, of course. And the rest of the novel is filled with her trying to figure out how to evade police discovery, less so trying to figure out who killed her lover. It tackles mother and daughter issues in the same way that Cody's novel tackles some mother-daughter issues, but it's for a suspense novel. French's novel is surprisingly unsuspenseful. The denouement comes around the 350-page mark, and it's oddly unmotivated. The character who's involved in that denouement maybe is motivated, but there's no build-up to the reveal. Very odd in a suspense novel. So if you are looking for a good suspense novel that's very well written, that's not actually a genre read, I would recommend the Cody novel over the more recent Nikki French novel, which is not among French's best. So other than that, I read a handful of other things that I'm not going to talk about today. The most standout read of the week was Cody's Watching You Without Me, which I highly recommend, followed by Demeline's Empire of Wild, which I think has really interesting things to say about cosmologies. followed by, strangely enough, Canadian Crusoe, and then followed last and very much least, The Lying Room by Nikki French, which you can probably take a pass on. So I think I'm going to go finish peeling some vegetables and get ready for this evening's meal. And I hope that you have had a fabulous reading week and that you have a great week coming up. Bye-bye.